At a time when nearly 27% of China's land has been swallowed by desertification, with massive dust storms capable of reaching as far as Japan and South Korea, an unprecedented campaign is underway. Billions of tons of desert sand are being excavated to build a green belt covering 193,000 square miles. This is not merely a tree planting project. It is an effort to rebuild an ecosystem on one of the most monumental scales of the modern era. But the paradox is this: those enormous projects are also triggering another environmental disaster, affecting millions of people. Will this ambition to control nature succeed, or repeat the resource management mistakes that once sparked major controversy in the United States? Up next, we will explore a bold mega project you can only find in China. To understand why this campaign exists, we first need to look at a much bigger picture. Desertification is not a local incident, but an accelerating global trend. At this moment, about 13 million square miles of land on Earth have been desertified, equivalent to nearly 40% of the planet's land surface. Most of it is concentrated in Asia and Africa, where population density is high and livelihoods depend directly on arable land. In China, this crisis did not appear suddenly. It grew out of ecological degradation that accumulated over many decades. In 1949, forest cover had fallen to just 8% and continued to decline due to overgrazing and uncontrolled logging, causing soil erosion, nutrient loss, and a gradual collapse of farming capacity, creating one of the most severe ecological crises of the 20th century. By the 1980s, the degradation accelerated sharply, turning China into one of the world's largest desertification hotspots. While the South retained ecological moisture, the North was pulled into a spiral of extreme dryness that was nearly suffocating. Limited water supplies were drained by factories, massive farms, and rapidly expanding cities. People drilled more wells, built more dams, and diverted waterways, but the consequence was that many rivers began to disappear. Even the Yellow River, once a source of national pride, went dry for up to 6 months a year during certain periods. The result was a landscape-scale shift. Nearly 2.6 million square kilometers of China's territory has now turned into desert, roughly equal to the combined area of Mexico and Spain, setting up a race against time between humans and the desert. And it would not be China if it did not find a clever solution to any challenge it faces. From the late 1970s, China began deploying a series of mega land restoration projects that astonished the world. Instead of treating isolated erosion points, the strategy aimed to restructure the entire northern ecological belt. When northern China was left with only about 5% forest cover, the Gobi Desert stretched across northern China and Mongolia, making it one of the 6 largest deserts in the world. In 1978, the Great Green Wall project was launched, a massive artificial forest belt, also known as the tree wall, designed to create a biological shield against dust storms and restore ecosystem functions. But the core challenge quickly became clear. Planting trees in desert conditions is nothing like planting forests in humid regions. Temperatures can swing from -40 degrees Fahrenheit in winter to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, while strong winds can bury young seedlings overnight. If traditional forestry methods were applied, survival rates would be close to zero. To keep trees alive, Chinese engineers developed creative solutions. Moisture retention systems were buried deep underground to supply water over long periods. Funnel-shaped planting pits were designed to collect dew and scarce rainfall, and the sand surface was covered with mesh or straw to reduce near-ground wind speed. The selected species were not chosen for fast growth, but for extreme drought tolerance, such as saxaul, red willow, and desert poplar, with root systems capable of reaching dozens of meters down to access groundwater. The goal of the early phase was not to make the land green, but to stop the sand from moving. After more than 4 decades, China's efforts produced measurable results. By 2009, artificial forests covered about 193,000 square miles, becoming the largest man-made forest area on the planet. A 2020 report showed that this green belt absorbs large amounts of CO2, cools regional temperatures, and helps reduce the impacts of climate change. Notably, in the 1980s, the Gobi Desert had been expanding by about 3,800 square miles per year. But by 2022, it was shrinking by more than 770 square miles annually, a historic turning point. Years later, satellite data and field surveys began to show something few expected. The sand line was no longer advancing, but retreating in several monitored zones. However, some environmental scientists argue that the long-term impacts of large artificial forest belts still need continued monitoring and evaluation. From a country once mocked for being overwhelmed by advancing deserts, China has not only achieved what the United States failed to accomplish in places like the Colorado River Basin or the southwestern megadrought, but is also emerging as a major global leader in large-scale ecological engineering. What do you think about this? Slowing the advance of desertification in the Gobi does not mean China's fight against desertification is over. Gobi was only the first battlefield. As the northern greenbelt began to show results, another reality quickly emerged. The most dangerous hotspot lay farther west, in the Taklamakan Desert. Often called the Sea of Death of China, Taklamakan covers about 130,000 square miles with more than 85% made up of shifting sand dunes. In the early 2000s, sandstorms from this region repeatedly blanketed all of Xinjiang and swept into neighboring provinces, damaging roads and farmland. As a result, the Taklamakan Greenbelt project was launched. Different name, but a process largely modeled on the Gobi approach. Study the harsh climate, select drought-resistant trees, plant in grid patterns to break the wind, cover the sand with straw or mesh before planting, and install drip irrigation systems. Over more than 40 years, hundreds of thousands of workers created what many consider a miracle, as a biological belt roughly 1,715 miles long gradually formed around the desert's edge. The final 177-mile segment began construction in 2022, with the participation of about 600,000 workers and volunteers. Core species such as desert poplar, red willow, and saxaul were used to build durable windbreak strips capable of long-term sand stabilization. These tree belts also created a new economic zone, from fire-resistant wood and medicinal leaves to desert-based herbal products, all becoming stable income sources for local communities. What began as an ecological defense line has gradually turned into a livelihood belt, where environmental and economic goals increasingly intersect. It cannot be denied. China's large-scale reforestation projects are impressive, slowing desertification and placing the country among the global pioneers in desert afforestation. But as these new forests grow, a new paradox quietly emerges. While China is fighting sand, it is also fueling a massive demand for sand to build its megacities. By 2026, about 68% of China's population is projected to live in urban areas, with annual construction demand still requiring nearly 3 billion tons of sand. The problem is that desert sand is largely unusable. After long-term wind erosion, the grains are too round and too fine to form strong bonds in construction materials. That forces the building industry to turn to other sources, river sand and freshwater lake sand, where grains are more angular and provide better binding strength. The main hotspot is Poyang Lake, China's largest freshwater lake, which once covered nearly 1,700 square miles at peak season. But every day, hundreds of dredging vessels, some capable of extracting 11,000 tons per day, are cutting deeper into the lakebed. In less than 2 decades, the average water level has dropped by more than 25%. Farming areas around the lake are increasingly facing cracked soils and unstable harvests. Worse still, Poyang Lake once functioned as a natural flood buffer for the Yangtze River. With its bottom heavily dredged, summer floodwaters now move more directly downstream. A major flood could destroy more than 1 million homes. Although the Chinese government has issued bans and restrictions on sand mining since 2000, billion-dollar profits continue to drive illegal sand mining crews operating in the shadows. Controlling sand is not just ecological, it is logistical survival. Even as controversy over resource extraction grows, one reality does not change. Desert control projects cannot be stopped. To sustain the economy and develop Xinjiang's vast oil and gas reserves, China built the Taklamakan Highway in 1993, a bold lifeline cutting across the country's largest shifting sand desert. At first, it was used only to transport materials, but a few years later, it opened to residents and tourists, becoming a critical desert transport route. It did not remain a single road for long. The system expanded into 3 main branches: the primary route stretching hundreds of miles, a 97-mile side branch, and Route A at 263 miles connecting oases and strategic oil fields. The greatest challenge is not initial construction, but keeping the road alive. Under strong winds, sand dunes can shift and bury the pavement within hours. As a result, each kilometer of highway is engineered as a sand control corridor. Continuous windbreak tree belts line both sides, combined with large-scale irrigation systems to sustain vegetation in extremely dry conditions. Notably, this is China's first carbon-neutral highway system, with 109 irrigation wells and 86 solar power stations, saving about 1,000 tons of diesel fuel and 3,410 tons of CO2 each year. Where there was once only wind and sand, a ribbon of black asphalt now cuts across massive dunes, a remarkable sight. In addition, a 439-mile railway line was built, with about 90% of its length passing through areas that previously had no road access at all. Opened for freight in 2009 and for passengers in 2010, it is an engineering marvel featuring 180 bridges and more than 1,000 underpasses and tunnels. But unlike conventional railways, the main threat here is not load, it is blowing sand. To keep operations safe, China established 9 sand control centers, planted windbreak strips, and installed specialized mesh systems to stabilize dunes. Thousands of workers continuously clear sand, sometimes finishing in the morning only to see the wind cover everything again by afternoon. This steel lifeline across the desert is proof that humans can push the limits of nature. In fact, deserts, often seen as dead land, hold a major advantage. Few places receive as much solar energy. China has seized this opportunity to turn sand into massive power plants. At the edge of the Gobi Desert, one representative project is a solar thermal power plant with an energy tower about 850 feet tall, roughly the height of a 60-story building, surrounded by around 12,000 giant reflective mirrors. During the day, the entire mirror field tracks the sun and concentrates light onto the top of the central tower, generating temperatures high enough to heat molten salt storage and produce steam to drive turbines. Unlike conventional photovoltaic solar systems, molten salt thermal systems can store energy for many hours, allowing the plant to continue generating electricity even after sunset. The plant has been in operation since late 2018, with a designed output of 390 million kilowatt-hours per year. In the Kabuki Desert, the scene is even more spectacular. 196,000 solar panels arranged in the shape of a giant galloping horse, covering more than 15 million square feet, the largest energy artwork in the world, certified by Guinness. The facility has generated more than 2.3 billion kilowatt-hours of green electricity, saving about 760,000 tons of coal and reducing 1.85 million tons of CO2, equivalent to removing 400,000 gasoline cars from U.S. roads for a year. Over more than a decade, Kabuki has demonstrated that ecological economics can become a real development engine. After more than 4 decades of fighting sand, China is not stopping. The next target is 2050, to create a continuous green ring across the entire northern region and expand forest coverage by about 137,000 square miles. To achieve this ambitious goal, China is relying not only on manpower, but also on advanced technology. AI-based forest monitoring systems will track soil moisture, wind conditions, and vegetation health, while solar-powered smart irrigation systems will automatically adjust water delivery by zone. But this story is not only about China. It also serves as a map of hope for dry regions across the planet, from Africa to the American West. In your view, can this model be scaled globally to fight desertification and climate change?